Hello everyone, this is Darion GNB here, and welcome to another GNB discussion, and another installment of Hedgehog Month. I don't really know how to naturally bleed into this topic, so I'll just hurry up and get into it. The youthfulness of Sonic characters is something that's kind of been on my mind for a while, and I think it's something the franchise should do a better job at focusing on, or at the very least, make more apparent, so to speak. I remember a while ago, some site from Sega of Japan, I believe, removed the ages for the Sonic characters, making the ages a little less specific. So for example, where Sonic was always 15 years old, that's now been removed and it's a little more vague. Now on the surface, this isn't that big of a deal, but this, along with stuff like the IDW comics and Sonic Frontiers, has kind of made it more apparent that whether intentionally or not, it doesn't just end with the characters' ages getting removed. The characters in these few recent entries in the franchise kind of lack that charm that they once had earlier in the series. I won't say they're badly written, but it just feels like for a few of them, something is missing. And then after a while, it just kind of clicked that they don't feel like kids anymore. From the beginning, a lot of the Sonic cast were written and portrayed to be teenagers or young kids. Sonic is an edgy, rebellious, and energetic teenager. Tails is very clearly a smart yet naive kid. Knuckles was a loner who grew up isolated and as such is still pretty gullible in his own right. Amy is a very bright, cheerful, and bubbly young girl. Cream is kind of self-explanatory. Shadow an emotionally reserved introvert, etc. I could go on, but it's quite apparent a lot of the cast were initially written to have this youthful quality to their personality. And it just feels like in recent years, certain writers have kind of forgotten that. Tails doesn't really feel like Sonic's impressionable kid brother like he used to. Sonic himself doesn't have that young little shithead attitude they pushed for earlier in the series. And Amy in some of the recent stuff doesn't feel like her bright and bubbly self from earlier in the series either. This stuff in some aspects goes even further beyond writing, and even as far as the voices for the characters as well. In either my Sonic X Shadow Gens video or my Sonic 3 video, I honestly can't fucking remember which one, I mentioned there being a misconception some people have on Shadow, being that he's supposedly significantly older than the other Sonic characters, when that isn't really the case. Physically and mentally, he'd be close to Sonic and Knuckles in age, and the reason I think many believe this misconception is because a majority of Shadow's English voices depict him as having this super low and gravelly tone, which makes him seem way older than he's actually intended. Guys like David Humphrey and Sonic Prime's Ian Hanlon do a pretty good job of giving us a more youthful Shadow voice. This is another reason why many people, including myself, also aren't fond of Roger Craig Smith as Sonic, because his voice just doesn't naturally strike that youthful tone and energy like some of the voices that came before and after. And if I'm being honest, the direction has just kind of gotten worse over time for me. Sonic in Frontier sounds like Chris fucking Redfield, and it just doesn't work for me. I think one of the biggest reasons why is because it creates less of an interesting character dynamic with arguably the second most important character in the franchise, Dr. Eggman. Sonic and Eggman are meant to contrast each other in many different ways, one of which being that Sonic sort of represents the young, rebellious youth of the world, going against the old, jaded, and more controlling authoritarian figures of the world. That contrast, that dichotomy, becomes a little less interesting, at least to me, when you have both Sonic and Eggman sound like two fully grown-ass men. Now you might be saying, Darion, this stuff doesn't matter. It can just be explained by the Sonic characters growing and maturing. And to that I ask, why? Why do the Sonic characters have to grow and mature in this aspect? It'd be like if the Looney Tunes started to get older and shit. That's kinda not the point. The Sonic series is extremely episodic in nature. Yes, certain things cross over game to game, like Shadow's story for instance, but the series isn't like Resident Evil or Devil May Cry, where we're meant to follow and watch these characters grow over the span of several years and decades and shit. That's not really the point in Sonic, and while I'm not inherently against the idea of having stories where the Sonic characters are older and more mature, so to speak, if it's in this fashion where certain traits that were baked into these guys from the start over time just get dropped and as a result makes the cast and the dynamics amongst them a little less fun, I think we have a bit of a problem here. And I need to stress that these traits and qualities not being apparent doesn't make the characters poorly written, at least to me. But, like I said earlier, it really just feels like something is kind of missing. With Tails especially. Tails in a lot of games post-Unleashed just doesn't feel much like a kid. And even if he is growing up, so to speak, I still expect that youthful charm to be present with the character in some shape or form. This kind of stuff became super apparent to me on my most recent rewatch of Sonic X. I don't know if my video on that will be up before or after this one, but there are so many scenes that have characters like Tails, Amy, and Cream hanging out and doing bullshit that really puts it into perspective like, oh yeah, these are kids. And that kind of thing just hasn't been in the series for a while. Except it also kind of has at the same time. Yeah, that's the really confusing part about all this. When it comes to the current writers on the series, or I guess I should say Ian Flynn specifically, he, like some other writers, kind of move away from these certain characteristics, but for some reason he brings them back around whenever he writes for the classic versions of these characters. And it's extremely noticeable when in contrast to how he writes the modern versions of them. Classic Sonic has more of his shithead and bratty attitude compared to when Flynn writes modern Sonic. Classic Amy has a consistently more bubbly and energetic demeanor. I'm sorry if I keep repeating the same words over and over, there are only so many I can use to describe what the hell I'm talking about. And Tails really feels like Sonic's kid brother here, more compared to when Flynn writes the modern version. And I just have to ask, why is it that he makes these little quirks more apparent for the classic versions and not the modern versions? I can only surmise that he wants to treat the modern cast as if they're way older and mature, while the classic versions are just the younger versions. Now, this is something that bothers me when it comes to Sega's whole handling of the series, because the classic and modern versions are not that far apart in age as some people would think. The jump from classic to modern wasn't the characters growing up, it was just an art style change. Modern Sonic is still very much a teenager just like classic Sonic, so this kind of distinction when it comes to writing them doesn't make much sense to me. I think that's all I gotta say on this topic. The Sonic characters' youthfulness is a fun aspect of their personality, and I think it should still be retained in some shape or form. So if you agree or disagree with anything I've said in this video, let me know in the comments below. Also be sure to like and subscribe. This has been Darion GNB. Take care.